Hey guys, welcome back to our conversations here on the antebellum period, this idea of sectionalism and the growing divide between North and South over the issues of slavery, economics, states' rights over federal rights, and so forth. So today our essential question, what we're kind of trying to look at is how did the tensions of sectionalism for these next 5 years between 1856 and 1860, how did they come irreconcilable? How did they get to the point where they could not be solved anymore through compromise, they could not be solved anymore through um, Congress or through delegation, and how did Civil War and secession eventually take place? So if we look at our timeline, once again, we have seen already how sectionalism kind of created originally over the place of rising interests that were different between North and South and West over economics and then the issue of slavery. But most of these ideas were mild and could eventually be solved via compromise, whether it was Henry Clay's Missouri Compromise or the Compromise of 1850. We then saw last time that with the growth of abolitionism over in the West, this idea that over the morality of slavery with certain abolitionists like William Lloyd Garrison, Harry Beecher Stowe with the creation of Uncle Tom's Cabin, really kind of put into question whether slavery should even be allowed at all, whether it was moral or it needed to be abolished. And this is going to lead into now these next 5 years or these 4 years leading up to the Civil War as to whether or not the North and South can even coexist. So the 1856 election between James Buchanan, William Fremont, and Millard Fillmore are really going to become important because it's going to change the landscape of elections moving forward to where it is more based on geographic region more than anything else. And you can see here that there's a clear distinction between Democrats in the South and then Republicans in the North. And you have one state here for the Know Nothing Party. This is going to be the first time the Republican Party has a say in the election. This is the first time that they have a mainstream candidate in the election who is really running on abolition and is trying to basically stop slavery in the West, while you have James Buchanan, who is running more on a traditional Democratic platform on keeping slavery where it is and trying to find some sort of peace between North and South. And this will become the most important issue in American politics. And even though that they had lost the 56 election, Republicans do see that they have enough support or enough electoral votes that they could win even without the South, as long as they can get certain states like Illinois, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. Dred Scott is going to become really kind of a martyr for the cause, and even though he is not going to win his court case is really going to push for a abolitionist movement and an all-out support for the Republican Party in the North. Just to give a little bit of a backstory with Dred Scott, he is a slave. His owner takes him to from Missouri, where he's originally from as a slave, to the states that are free as Illinois and Wisconsin, and he's going to spend quite a bit of time there. And Dred Scott basically has the belief that because he's living in these free states, that therefore he should be free, and he's going to take this to the courts, and it's going to rise all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is going to come back with a decision, or at least have these two different questions. Does Congress have the power to decide on slavery in the territories, and is the Missouri Compromise constitutional? This really kind of goes over federal government versus state government rights. So eventually in 1857, the Supreme Court comes back with a ruling, and unfortunately for Dred Scott, he does not win. The Supreme Court comes back and says that because he is not a citizen, because he is a slave, he does not have the right to sue, therefore his case needs to be thrown out. And that Congress did not have the power to stop slavery in Western territories, which basically made the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional. Of course, if you're an abolitionist from the North, you're going to be furious with this because now it's allowed for, you can see here in the map, slavery in all territories. Okay, so anything that is not a free state will now allow for slavery. So slavery has expanded farther than it has at any point so far. And this is going to lead to a heated debate in Illinois, especially for the Senate race, where Democrat Stephen Douglas is going to run against newly Republican Abraham Lincoln for the Illinois Senate seat. Lincoln was an unknown young politician at the time. He was really more of a Henry Clay Whig than anything else, but he was a free soiler in the fact that he believed that they had to stop the spread of slavery and confine it only to the South. Even though Lincoln loses the election, he does make himself a very popular on a national stage, and kind of becomes an instrumental figure against slavery in the viewpoints of the South. So the South will really kind of oppose Lincoln strongly because they believe that he is trying to take slavery away in the southern states as well. In one of his political debates, Lincoln has kind of this famous quote on the friction or the sectionalism that is growing between North and South. And he says here that a house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free, essentially meaning that at some point this issue on slavery has to be resolved or the country will fall apart. And we'll see that as Lincoln eventually runs for president and becomes elected president, his main goal is not just to is not really to end slavery, it is more to preserve the Union at all costs. So abolitionist John Brown, who we've already kind of mentioned briefly, was a staunch abolitionist from Kansas who helped to organize raids and murders in Kansas against slave owners and people who voted for slavery in Kansas. He is a radical abolitionist. We talked about, is he a villain? Is he a saint? Well, he's going to take his abolitionist movement to Virginia as well. And he's going to lead an unsuccessful abolitionist raid in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. And it gets to the point where General Robert E. Lee and his men are going to capture Brown. He's going to be caught and eventually going to be hung for his crimes against the state of Virginia. But this is going to be kind of seen as a movement for the North. And he's going to be seen as a martyr, meaning somebody who dies for a good cause. And John Brown's death is going to lead to a even more growing abolitionist movement in the North to try to end slavery, as they've seen through the Dred Scott case, that slavery is continuing to expand to places they would never have wanted it to in the past. However, if you're a Southerner, you see this completely different. You see John Brown as a terrorist who is using violence to gain political means. So, this kind of gets back into the whole discussion, is John Brown a saint or is he a villain? So as tensions continue to rise, we'll fast forward a little bit to 1860, and we're on the brink of Civil War. The South is terrified of Abraham Lincoln. They believe that he is a radical free soiler who wants to take away their way of life, while the North is tired of what they believe to be tyrannical government at the hands of the Supreme Court, which has allowed slavery to expand into all territories, not including the free states. And as we get to this election of 1860, it gets to the point where the southern states here that we can see in green, they don't even put Abraham Lincoln on the ballots. He's not even up for election. So even if you are somebody who is anti-slavery in the South, you cannot vote for Abraham Lincoln. However, Lincoln and the Republican Party know that because they have enough support in the northern states who are more populated, states like New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, they're able to have enough votes acquired that they can win even without the support of the South. And that's exactly what Lincoln does. And part of the issue for that is that the Democrats themselves were split, or the South itself was split between three different parties, which allowed for Lincoln to get that 59% majority vote that he needed. The South was split between John Breckinridge, Bell, and Stephen Douglas, who all had different views on the issue of slavery and all had different ideas on how slavery should be resolved within the different states. So as soon as Lincoln is elected president, the southern states, especially the deep southern states, are very soon going to begin discussing the possibility of seceding from the Union because they are terrified that Lincoln is coming for their way of life. And eventually in December of 1860, South Carolina will become the first state to officially secede from the Union. They will soon be followed by 6 more states, which will kind of conform the Confederacy, and then eventually by 1861, all states from Virginia southward all the way to Texas and Florida will also secede from the Union. And with this newly founded Confederacy, we will see that the Civil War eventually ensue with the hands of the North, as Lincoln will do whatever he can to make sure that the South or the Union, I'm sorry, is maintained and the South eventually comes back to the Union. So we will continue our discussions next time. We'll get into the war itself now that the South has seceded, and see kind of how the war is fought, which side should be favored, and who has certain advantages and disadvantages. Make sure again to come into class with any questions you might have, and I will see you next time.